coming from here. Italic Academy of Arts and Design in Jerusalem. This is the view from the window. Thank you for inviting me, Granshan people, Boris, Jerry, others. It is a pleasure and honor to be here. I'm going to tell you a little story today, a story about type, about sources of inspiration, and about type as an expression for an ideology. My talk will deal with the history of the Hebrew letter, but specifically with a certain decade in which the form of the Hebrew letter changed drastically. A time in which the Hebrew letter that was practically lost, stuck, frozen for many centuries was finally refound and revived. Now, some of you might have heard me talk about this topic in the past in other conferences. You are most welcome to leave now, it's fine, it's okay. But if you stay, I hope I did quite a lot of additional research during the last year, and I think I've revealed a few really fascinating and unknown facts relevant to this story. So, first of all, we'll talk about Hebrew, assuming that not all of you are familiar with this script. I'll go very quickly to introduce the script very briefly regarding this question of terminology before. So it's not complex. It's very simple script. It is non-Latin, but maybe perhaps it is better said prior to Latin, before Latin, and not complex, as I said. Okay, so we have 22 letters, 5 of which have final forms, and it is a script read from right to left. We have no uppercase letters, nor any other typographic tools, no italics, no small caps, very simple. 5 descenders and 1 ascender exist in Hebrew, but compared to Latin, they occur very, well, not rarely, but not very often. Now, Hebrew is usually thought of as a horizontal stress script, although I should say that many contemporary sans serif typefaces, as well as a few serifs, show a very strange vertical stress, or none at all. There are 3 different hands or styles in Hebrew: the formal square letter in serif and sans, a semi-cursive, very rare, used only for rabbinical commentaries. I can hardly read this, and cursive flowing handwriting style for correspondence, everyday writing. These are the 3 hands. Now, a bit of historical background. Since the creation of the first Hebrew letter in print in 1475 in Italy and until the dawn of the 20th century, all Hebrew typefaces were clearly based on calligraphic styles found in manuscripts in medieval Europe. There were 2 prevalent styles seen in Europe since the 12th century, roughly. The first one is the Ashkenazic, this one, mainly developed in Northern Europe, in France and Germany. And the other one is the Sephardic, mostly seen in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Spain. And I should mention here that, generally speaking, this style, the Sephardic, is the one that later defined most of the development of the Hebrew typographic letter. So we have these 2. One at the top is the Ashkenazic, at the bottom the Sephardic. They're quite different, as you can see. And then up until the end of the 19th century, as I mentioned before, Hebrew was really a dead language. It was not used, it was used solely for religious and ritual texts, and therefore it froze. As a consequence, the Hebrew letter, the visual form of the language, was preserved with no significant changes all along those centuries. Most of the typefaces designed try to imitate manuscript calligraphic styles, but as opposed to what happened with the Latin letter, and this was already mentioned before in some of the talks, the move from the calligraphic hand to the printed letter in Hebrew, one cannot trace any phases of this standardization, regularization, gradual improvement and refinement. On the contrary, many Hebrew typefaces were based on very poor writing styles, like this one, extremely contrasted, as you can see, and very hard to read. Others, again like this one, suffered from severe letter differentiation problems And when I talk about letter differentiation, I mean that these two are two different letters, just to give you an idea. So what happened, in fact, is that this conversion of the manuscripts to movable type preserved and fixated, actually, inferior quality standards. It was this typeface, the Frank Rule, created by Jewish cantor Raphael Frank and the type founder Rule in Leipzig around 1910, which first liberated actually the script, the Hebrew script, from the shortcomings of the past. In spite of it being a bit kind of an Art Nouveau style, this type had better proportions, better letter differentiation, and also reduced contrast. It's interesting to know that this typeface is the most popular Hebrew text type to date, more than 100 years later. Now, from the 20s to the 50s, two parallel tracks can be recognized in the development of the Hebrew letter. One we can see here, on one hand, is the reviving of manuscript medieval styles, and the other, very, very different, was a geometric sans, simple, no ornaments, influenced clearly by modernist movements such as the Bauhaus and the Stil. And so there were the two different alternatives, or two tracks. It should be stressed here as well that there was just a handful of types created during that time. It's a very tiny market. Now, in 1948, the State of Israel was founded. It was during the 1950s that the state saw rapid growth in population. The population was stable, and growth, huge growth in industry, business, commerce, etc. The printing industry produced more Hebrew newspapers, books, ephemera, and the such. And new type was needed. It's very clear. But except for the need for more printing in terms of volume, and also perhaps in terms of range, I do think that the type was needed as an expression of the rebirth and the reconnection of the Jewish people to its homeland and origins. And so, after the publishing of only one single typeface during the preceding 15 years, 5 new and innovative typefaces were released during just 4 years, from 54 to 58. And those typefaces are David, Hadassah, Hatzvi, Narkis Bloch, and Cohen. All these 5 are considered today as some of the best typefaces we have, the most legible Hebrew typefaces we have. To a large extent, one could say that these typefaces created the modern Hebrew canonical typeforms. These years were definitely the formative years of modern Hebrew type design. I should mention that the design of 3 out of these 5 started many years before, but apparently only during these years, during the 50s, the conditions were met, the designs matured, and the typefaces were released. Tzvi Narkis, the renowned Israeli type designer, and in my view, the most important and talented Hebrew type designers of modern times, he wrote that he saw the release of 4 new Hebrew typefaces, the Cohen, David, Hadassah, and Hatzvi, during just a few years. He saw this event as one of the most important events in the history of Hebrew typography. Clearly, his own Narkis Bloch can join this distinguished list. He also mentioned the fact that each of the typefaces was developed individually without any reference to the other designers. So one can assume that he stressed that, trying to emphasize the phenomenon. But in fact, this is not true. All 5 designers were working in Jerusalem at the same time. Jerusalem was a rather small city at the time, and they knew each other. All, apart from Narkis, were immigrants from Germany, and Narkis himself told me in a conversation we had 10 years ago or so, that he collaborated with Ismar David, the designer of the David typeface, while the latter was working for Eliyahu Cohen, the 3rd designer. Moshe Spitzer, who designed the Hatzvi typeface, and David were corresponding. I saw many letters between them. And Spitzer himself wrote clearly in a few essays that he was involved in the design of the David typeface. So I will not confuse you with all those names, but it's very clear that, and I found evidence showing that they were all in touch, in fact. And what I'm trying to say here is that it was, to an extent, a community. And that one might guess that those designers were discussing those issues, consulting and influencing each other. Now, type design and calligraphy in those years, in the 50s, were highly influenced by the extensive archaeological excavations in Israel. New unknown shapes were revealed, in such findings such as this, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, the so-called hidden scrolls, dated from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. The scrolls were found here in the Judean desert, in the caves of Qumran, near the Dead Sea, and actually about a half an hour drive from the academy where I teach. More new letter forms were found in burial inscriptions, such as this from the 1st century BC, or this, or in mosaic lettering works, such as this one from the 5th century. And all these were very, very different from what you saw before, from what was developed during the Middle Ages. For the national exhibition celebrating the first 10 years of the nation, which was a very important national exhibition, the organizing committee commissioned a custom typeface. Now, this is remarkable and very rare. Until now, I don't know many custom Hebrew typefaces commissioned by institutions in the country. Clearly, at the time, this was a very strong statement. I should state here that this commission, to the best of my knowledge, is completely unknown. I mean, no one knows about it. I don't think anyone wrote about it. And the story of how I found about it is quite nice. I think it's a nice anecdote, a bit cheesy, but it is entirely true. A few months ago, I flipped through a professional printing magazine from the 50s I had in my collection, and this fell out to the floor. And it's a true story. And this is what I really needed. This was the Holy Grail. This reads, the title is, a type was chosen, or typeface was chosen for the decade's exhibition. Now, this is a sensation, but the subtitle is right here, is even more of a sensation, because it reads, the letters of the hidden scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, were used as a model. And I didn't need anything except for that. And indeed, the letter forms look clearly as they were influenced by ancient models. This type was designed by, well, it's not a type, it's a lettering system. It's never it was not used as a typeface, it was not made as a typeface. And strangely enough, looking at pictures from the exhibition design, I couldn't find it anywhere. There was another typeface used, which is another story probably, and it's worth researching, but that's for another talk. But if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls type, you see clearly that this was the inspirational model. Also, if we take a look at the logotype for the exhibition, or for the entire year actually, this says 10 for Israel. Oops. You can clearly spot the 10, the numerals, the 1 and the 0. The 1 here and the big 0 around the symbol. But let's take a look at the letter forms. And especially on this one, the last one here, which is the Lamed. And look how tall it is. Okay. Just for a moment, we go back to the hidden scrolls, to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you see how long is this vertical stroke of the Lamed, and as well as the fact that the stroke that goes down is not touching the baseline. It kind of floats here and here. So again, I think the model is very, very clear, and comparing it to the Ashkenazic style, you can clearly see that it's entirely different. Yeah, okay, so these three. Well, as you well know, all of you in this room, changes in letter forms development are first seen usually in lettering, the less kind of less formal form, in shop signs, in logo designs, in book covers, etc. And then slowly these ideas began to show in typeface design. So I started looking at lettering, formal and informal lettering. And if we take a look at this very, very formal expression of the authority, coins, this is one of the first series the Bank of Israel produced, and these were made in 1952. The image is archaeological, as you can see here, but the type is not. The type is mostly derived from medieval styles. But the second series, released in '62, but as we well know, all of us, producing coins takes a very long time, so one can assume that the design, the lettering style was made quite a few years before. The letter forms do look clearly like modern interpretations of antique lettering. They are a kind of sans serif, as you can see, monolinear, but clearly they don't look like Latin models we've seen before, the geometrical sans, but rather like Hebrew antique lettering. And the same goes for the current series, which was coined in the 80s and still being used. The lettering is still very similar and echoes very clearly the antiquity. If we look just for a moment at one of the letters, oops, this one here on top, this letter Kuf, and we again compare it with the Ashkenazic on the right-hand side and the Sephardic on the left side, you see that there's a disconnection. There's two strokes disconnected, whereas here it's one stroke, or it's not one stroke, but they're connected. And this is, again, the ancient model. So the findings were more than anything, they looked for proof, the archaeological findings, for the historical bridge between the biblical era and the modern state of Israel. Henry Friedlander, the renowned type designer, he said, and I quote, "Archaeological and similar activities have yielded many specimens of antique lettering, giving us an insight into the basic shapes and the way they have subsequently developed. As a result, lettering from the 1st century BC until the 6th century AD has become alive, and it is now strongly influencing our calligraphy." This was written in the 50s or right after it. What we see here is the official Independence Day poster for the 10th anniversary of the state, designed by Miriam Karoli. And as you can see, the main image of the poster is, again, celebrating, the image that celebrates the 10 years of the country is mosaic excavations. And needless to say, the type, or the letter forms, again, are clearly influenced by antique models. So now, with your permission, I'll focus for a moment briefly on two typefaces, David and Hatzvi. No time for this block, sorry. It's a leftover, obviously, from another talk. So, focusing for a moment on Hatzvi, it's a robust, simplified, monolinear typeface. It was designed by Moshe Spitzer and Zvi Hausmann and released in 1956. It's a very interesting typeface, has a lot of interesting features, but for now I will focus only on two. Looking at this, and I'm looking for the inspirational model. Looking at this letter, Dalet, and especially on this connection right here on the upper right-hand side, and going back, comparing it to the medieval models, you see they're very different. But if we look at the models from antiquity, then I think it's very clear what the designer was looking at. Same goes for this letter, Kuf. We've seen it before, now we see it in a typeface, the same issue of the two strokes connected, as opposed to the medieval model where you have the two strokes disconnected, right here, and the antique models. I think this is very clear. David, the typeface David, which is David in English. I'll end up with this. And David is a true calligraphic Hebrew type. It was designed by Ismail David, released in 1954. And the designer, Ismail David, he was clearly aimed at innovation. He wanted to create something really new and different, yet related to tradition. In a letter he wrote to the world-famous architect, Erich Mendelssohn, he wrote, "As a contemporary artist, I have tried to retain the strength, beauty, and simplicity of Hebrew traditional design, but to strip it of the tasteless superfluities which have sometimes been added. While observing the history of the Hebrew letter, David chose a new track. He was inspired by other forms than those influenced all type designers until that point. He wrote, again, and I quote, "When I decided to venture into type design of Hebrew characters, it was clear to me that these designs would have to be much closer to classic Oriental Hebrew than the typefaces that had developed in Europe. What I set out to do was bring basic forms closer to true Old Semitic forms. No less than 4 revolutionary concepts I can spot in this typeface. The first one is the flaring of the terminals that you can see here and here. This is an amazing idea. And what he did is actually replaced the traditional serifs with this flaring of the strokes. And this is clearly the first time you can spot such a feature in Hebrew. It happens here as well. The triangle form for the serif is also a novelty, what we see here. We cannot see this anywhere before David. Now the second revolutionary concept is the creation of the Hebrew Italic. Hebrew Italic is a big issue, or the lack of Hebrew Italic, as I mentioned before. And this is the first, and to a large extent still is, the only true Hebrew Italic in existence. This really deserves a thorough research, and I won't go into it today, but it is obviously worth mentioning that David developed a true Hebrew Italic. The third groundbreaking idea is the creation of a multi-style type family that includes both serif and sans serif. Now, as far as I can tell, this was the first time such an idea emerged in Hebrew. But do pay attention. Even for Latin typography, the first probably release of such type family was in the 70s, as far as I can tell, with praxis and demos designed by Unger, who was here yesterday. Very few were investigating these ideas at the time. One known such experiment was the Romulus type of Van Grimpen during the 30s, but he didn't release both styles. And I don't know whether Ismail David, this Hebrew type designer, knew of Van Grimpen's ideas. I think it is very unlikely. But even if he did, this concept at that time for Hebrew is very innovative and very unique. And the fourth and last concept is the very creation of the Hebrew sans, which unfortunately wasn't released until recently. Now we've seen earlier Hebrew sans serifs, but they were all very constructed, very influenced by Latin script. Highly Latinized, I have to say, as opposed to this one, who designed, David, who really designed the sans serif, which is clearly based on the origins of the Hebrew script. So, to conclude my talk, I could have shown much more, but I hope I made this idea clear. And this is a type specimen, and more precisely the first announcement of this typeface Hatzvi. And it reads very proudly here, it says Hatzvi Ot Ivrit Chadasha, which means new Hebrew letter. The typefaces I've shown here are very, as I mentioned before, they're very popular Hebrew typefaces nowadays. They're all considered legible, easy to read, none of the letter forms are obtrusive or odd or strange. Yet, when they were introduced in the 1950s, some of those letter forms, as I've shown you today, were a complete innovation. They were completely new. To a certain extent, one could state that these typefaces changed really the formal convention of the modern Hebrew letter. I think it is the combination of the old and the new, the definition of a new ground for exploration, and the distilling and the capturing of the essence of the Hebrew letter that makes these typefaces revolutionary. Thank you.